Hey there, Rappies. Rapper9198 here, and welcome to another edition of Ryan's Day Reading. So today I'll be reading the final 2 chapters of How to Train Your Dragon. So chapters 18 and 19. So again, just a little recap. So they're having the 2 dragons going at each other, but it seems like it's not entirely working as the tribes wanted it to, because the Green Death still wants to eat Hiccup, and so he ends up eating Hiccup, but of course, with the dragon's digestion, so right now Hiccup was inside him. And so he was like, he's saying, I need to live. So then it leaves off with, there is a horrible creaking noise as the stout Roman spear, because he was hanging on a spear, so he's still alive right now. But the Roman spear is beginning to split in 2, and it's starting to break. And so now we're going to see what happens. So here's chapter 18, The Extraordinary Bravery of Toothless. So looks like Toothless will be coming to the rescue. And that would have been the end of Hiccup, if it had not been for the extraordinary bravery of a certain Toothless daydream. Toothless, if you remember, had refused to join in the battle at Death's Head Headland. He was intending to fly off somewhere down the coast a bit and lie low till all was safe again. But he stayed at the highest point for a while, terrorizing birds and rabbits. He must have been having a lovely time doing this, for he did not hear the approach of Stoic and the entire tribes of Hooligan and Meathead until Stoic grabbed him around the neck. "Where is my son?" asked Stoic. Toothless shrugged his shoulders rudely. "Where is my son?" bawled Stoic with an awe-inspiring yell so loud that Toothless's ears trembled. Toothless pointed to Death's Head Headland. "Show me," said Stoic grimly. Under Stoic's fierce eye, Toothless reluctantly flapped off toward Death's Head Headland, followed by the 2 tribes. They arrived just in time to see the terrible monster throw Hiccup high in the air and catch him in his mouth like a whelk. "So much for the fiendishly clever plan," thought Toothless. He was about to use the opportunity of Stoic's obvious distraction to sneak off to a place of safety when something stopped him. Nobody knows what that something was. It was a moment that changed the whole worldview of the Hooligan tribe. For centuries, we had believed it was impossible for dragons to consider a selfless thought or a generous action. But what Toothless did next is impossible to explain as being in his own best interest at the time. All his fellow domestic dragons were now flying somewhere over the inner ocean. As soon as they heard Fireworm's cry of "Dessert!" those who were hiding in caves or between crevices or crouched in the ferns rose up in a great swarm and abandoned their former masters as fast as their wings could carry them. Okay. The wild dragons from Wild Dragon Cliff had left hours before, but something kept Toothless from flying after them. Maybe it was Stoic's heart-rendingly powerless cry of "No!" that caused him to pause. Or maybe somewhere in that self-centered green dragon heart of his, he really was fond of Hiccup and grateful for the hours that he had spent looking after him, not shouting at him, telling him jokes, and giving him the biggest and juiciest lobsters. "Dragons are selfish, argued Toothless to himself. "Dragons are heartless and have no mercy. That's what makes us survivors." Nonetheless, something made him turn right around, and something made him fold his wings back and fly like a dragon blur to the great monster on the cliff tops, which really was not in Toothless's best interest, as I said before. Toothless flew right up the monster's left nostril and started flying up and down the inside of his nose, tickling it with his wings. The sea dragon lunged up and down, wrinkling his nose like crazy and bellowing, "Ah!" The creature stuck his great talon up his nose in a disgusting fashion and tried to winkle out the tickling flea that was irritating him. Toothless didn't quite get out of the way of the talon in time, and it scratched him on the chest. He hardly felt it, though. He was so excited and carried on tickling regardless, dodging the probing dragon claw. "Ah!" bellowed the sea dragon. Meanwhile, Hiccup was being thrown this way and that inside the dragon's throat as it shook its head from side to side. He was trying desperately to hang on to the spear, which was in danger of becoming dislodged any second. And there's Toothless flying to the rescue. Achoo! The dragon finally sneezed, and Hiccup, the spear, Toothless, and a great deal of perfectly revolting snot were scattered over the surrounding countryside. Toothless remembered, as he was shooting through the air, that boys can't fly. He folded his wings and dived after Hiccup, who was rapidly heading toward the ground. Toothless grabbed hold of Hiccup by the arm and tried to take his weight. Dragon's talons are extraordinarily strong, and he was able to break Hiccup's fall. Not entirely, but enough so that when Hiccup crashed into the heather, he was traveling reasonably slowly. Stoik came plunging frantically through the grass. He picked up his son and faced the monster, holding his shield over Hiccup's unconscious body. Toothless hid behind Stoik. The Green Death had recovered from his sneezing fit. He shuffled forward, bleeding horribly from the fatal wounds to his chest and throat. He lowered his terrible head till it was on a level with the cliff top, and his evil yellow eyes looked straight at Stoik. And there's Hiccup and Toothless as they're all being sneezed out of the Green Death's nostril. Yep. "Time to die for all of us," purred the Green Death. "You can't save his life now, you know. You are quite helpless. My fire will melt that shield like butter." The Green Death opened his mouth. He slowly sucked in a breath. Stoik tried to grab onto chunks of heather to hold them fast, but Stoik, Hiccup, and Toothless were being dragged slowly but surely toward the gigantic black tunnel that was the monster's open jaws. The Green Death paused for a moment before he blew out again, enjoying their terror. "This is what happens if you don't listen to the dragon law," shrieked Toothless to himself in horror as he peered around the side of Stoik's cloak. The monster puffed out his cheeks, and Stoik and Toothless waited for flames to consume them. But no fire came out. The Green Death looked very surprised. He puffed out his cheeks and blew a little harder, and again, no fire. He tried once more, and now his head seemed to be turning a strange purplish color with the effort of blowing, and it seemed to be swelling bigger and bigger as if he was being pumped up with air from the inside. The monster had no idea what was happening. He thrashed around wildly, and his eyes bulged larger and larger until, with a bang that could be heard for hundreds of miles in every direction, the Green Death blew up right in front of their eyes. This may seem like some sort of miracle or an intervention on the part of the gods, but in fact, there is a logical explanation. When Hiccup was hanging in the sea dragon's throat, desperately repeating, I need to live to himself, he had taken off his helmet and had plugged the horns as hard as he could into the fire holes. It was a perfect fit. So when the dragon tried to use his fire, the blockage caused a buildup of pressure that eventually grew so great that the Green Death simply exploded. Now, there were pieces of dragon flying in all directions. Stoic and Toothless were incredibly lucky not to get hit by anything, standing as close to the explosion as they were. But a single burning dragon tooth, 8 feet long, one of the monster's smaller ones, exploded straight toward Hiccup. The boy had been dragged out from under the shelter of Stoic's shield by the intake of the monster's breath, and now was lying on the ground a couple of feet in front of Stoic and Toothless, completely exposed. Stoic caught the movement of the tooth out of the corner of his eye and flung himself and his shield forward. Only a Viking could have gotten there in time. Shooting woodcock with a bow and arrow develops very quick reflexes. So Stoic's shield did save Hiccup's life after all. If it had not been there, the tooth would have impaled Hiccup like a prawn on a stick. As it was, it buried itself deep into the bronze center of the shield and quivered there, blazing with green-edged dragon flames. Stoic lifted the shield, terrified that the tooth might have pierced through to his son. But Hiccup was unharmed. His eyes were open and he was listening for something. He was listening for a strange sound that seemed to be coming from the flaming tooth itself. It was the sound of wheezy, echoing singing, like the wind blowing through the coral caves, and it went something like this. I tell the mighty big blue whale, his life is over soon. With one swish of this armored tail, I put out the sun and moon. The winds and gales are quivering when I begin to roar. The waves themselves are shivering and trembling back to shore. Yeah, listen, said Hiccup happily, just before he passed out. The supper is singing. All right, so that's it for chapter 18, and now the 19th and final chapter, Hiccup the Useful. 400 Vikings that were now gathered on the cliff tops broke into wild cheering for Hiccup and Toothless. They were a strange, barbaric sight, all covered in disgusting green dragon snot and slime, but beaming and shouting with the wild delight of those that have just been saved from a certain death. All around them, the terrible fight that had just taken place devastated the landscape. A choking green-gray smoke was hanging around, making it difficult to see, but great chunks of Death's Head headland appeared to have been torn out by the fight. Avalanches of rock were piled up on the beach. The terrible mountainous corpse of the purple death lay in the deeper water. Bits of the green death's insides and bones were scattered all over the place, while large sections of the heather and ferns were still in flames. However, by some extraordinary miracle, nearly all the Vikings and their dragons had survived the dreadful battle. I say nearly all, because when Toothless crept forward to lick the face of his master with a flickering forked tongue, Stoik noticed a ghastly wound on the little dragon's chest, which was pouring with bright green blood. The talon of the green death had pierced the very heart of the supposedly heartless little dragon. Toothless followed Stoik's gaze and looked down for the first time. He let out a squeal of terror and fainted dead away. Yeah. Oh my gosh. 2 days later, Hiccup woke up aching all over and very, very hungry. It was late at night. He was lying in Stoik's own great bed. The room seemed to be crowded with a great deal of people. Stoik was there, and Vahalarama, and Old Wrinkly, and Fishlegs, and most of the elders of the tribe. There were dragons there too, Newt's Breath and Hookfane snapping and biting around Stoik's legs, and Horror Cow perched on the end of Hiccup's bed. The dragons had flown back as soon as they heard the explosion and realized the masters of Berk were masters once more. Being dragons, they had given no explanation for their disappearance, but they did have the grace to look a little sheepish. "He's alive!" shouted out Stoik in triumph, and everybody began to cheer. Vahalarama gave Hiccup a rousing punch on the shoulder, which is the Viking mother's equivalent of a really big hug. "We're all here," said Vahalarama, "willing you to wake up?" Hiccup sat straight up in bed, suddenly very awake indeed. "But you're not all here," he said. Where's Toothless?" Everybody looked shifty, and nobody would look at Hiccup. Stoik cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm sorry, son," said Stoik. "But he didn't make it. He died just a few hours ago. The rest of the tribe are giving him a hero's funeral at this very moment." "It's a great honor," Stoik continued hurriedly. "He'll be the first dragon ever to be given a proper Viking burial." "How did you know he was dead?" Hiccup demanded. Stoik looked surprised. "Well, you know, the usual. No pulse, no breath, stone cold to the touch. He was quite clearly dead, I'm afraid." "Oh, honestly, Father," said Hiccup in a frenzy of exasperation. "Don't you know anything about dragons? That could have been a sleep coma. It's a good sign. Probably means he's healing himself." Or Thor's whiskers," said Fishlegs. They started that funeral a half an hour ago." We've got to stop them," yelled Hiccup. "Dragons are only fairly fireproof. They'll burn him alive." Hiccup leaped out of bed with amazing energy. Under the circumstances, he ran out of the room and out of the house, followed closely by Fishlegs and Horror Cow. Down at Hooligan Harbor, the awesome ceremony of the Viking military funeral was nearly coming to an end. It was an incredible sight, if Hiccup had been in the mood for it. The sky was crammed with stars, The sea was glass flat. The entire tribes of Hooligan and Meathead were gathered motionless on the rocks, and every single person was carrying a lighted torch in one hand. Even Snotlout was there, trying to look solemn with his helmet off his head out of respect, and his hair neatly brushed. Good riddance to the newt with wings, he was whispering slyly to Dog's Breath the dub brain, and Dog's Breath snickered. Serve him right for breaking the law, sneered Fireworm to Sea Slug, who was picking his nose on Dog's Breath's shoulder. A replica of a Viking ship had been put out to sea and was drifting swiftly away from the island of Berk along the path of the moon's reflection, past the weird shapes of Stoik and Mogadon's burned-out fleet. Hiccup could just see the small body of Toothless laid out in the boat. Beside him lay Stoik's shield, the dragon's tooth still stuck in it like a gigantic alien sword. Gobber the Belch sounded a mournful signal on his horn. He was now completely recovered after his unexpected flight. 26 of Stoik's finest archers, standing to attention at the right of the harbor, lifted their bows into the air. Every bow was loaded with an arrow in flame. No, no, no! Yelled Hiccup, the best yell he had ever yelled. But it was too late. The flaming arrows soared gracefully through the air. They landed on the ship and set it alight. Some of the crowd on the shore had turned to look upward, wondering who dared to disturb this most solemn ritual. Oh, Hiccup! Shouted Thuggery the Meathead, joyfully recognizing the figure on the horizon. Yep. And there's Hiccup, who was being all frantic trying to stop it. There was a murmur of wonder from the crowd as they whispered, Hiccup? To each other, and then shouted and cheered and called out his name louder and louder. Snotlout's jaw dropped open. He looked thoroughly disappointed to see Hiccup very much alive and well. Snotlout could just about take Hiccup as a dead hero. But a living Hiccup the hero was going to be very much in the way. Hiccup was watching the burning ship, tears pouring down his face. The boat tipped, and Stoik's shield and the tooth fell into the water. Just as the last piece of the boat was about to slip beneath the waves, to be consumed by fire and water, the flames reared up about 20 feet into the sky, and shooting out of those flames, wings spread wide like a phoenix, trailing fire from his tail like a comet, came Toothless. He soared high, high, high into the stars, leaving a path of flame as he flew. He dived down, down, down toward the sea and swooped up at the last minute. To cries of wonder from the spectators, Hiccup was anxious that he might be in pain until Toothless zoomed low enough over his head. Yep, there. Yeah, there's the boat and the arrows, and so if Hiccup was anxious that he might be in pain until Toothless zoomed low enough over his head for Hiccup to hear the little dragon's rooster cry of triumph. Whatever Toothless's faults may have been, you have to admire his sense of occasion. Common or garden dragons are not normally known for their spectacular flying skills, but even a common or garden dragon on fire is a spectacle in itself. Toothless burned through the night sky like a live firework, performing screaming fiery somersaults and flaming loop-de-loops. The crowd, who only a moment before were expecting to mourn the deaths of both Toothless and possibly Hiccup, were now beside themselves, hysterically cheering as Toothless showered them with sparks. At last, the fire got too hot for him, and Toothless plunged into the sea to extinguish himself, only to burst out again and fly straight to Hiccup's shoulder. There he acknowledged the wild applause with solemn bows to right and left, slightly spoiling his dignity with the odd cock-a-doodle-doo of smug self-congratulation. Stoic signaled to the crowd for silence, but only so he could boom out the following speech at full blast. Hooligans and meatheads, terrors of the sea, sons of Thor, and most feared masters of the dragon, I feel humbled to present you with the most recent member of the hooligan tribe. I give you my son, Hiccup the Useful. And the words, Hiccup the Useful, came echoing down from the hills behind and were shouted back again by the cheering crowd, and were picked up and carried on the night breeze until the whole world seemed to be telling Hiccup that maybe he was going to be useful after all. And that, my friends, is the hard way to become a hero. Yep, and that's it for chapter 19. And then also there's a little epilogue by the hero Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III, the last of the great Viking heroes. Yep, the story doesn't end. The story doesn't end there, of course. The 19 boys who entered initiation with me those many years ago were all allowed to enter into the hooligan and meathead tribes as a result of their heroic actions in defeating 2 sea dragonists Giganticus Maximus in one day. The battle at Death's Head Headland has passed into Viking legend and will be sung about by the bards while there are still bards to sing. Of course, there are very few bards left nowadays. What is more, nobody has seen a sea dragoness Giganticus Maximus since, and people are already starting to disbelieve that such a creature could have lived. Learned articles have been written suggesting that something that large simply could not have sustained its own weight. The dragons that would be my evidence have crawled back into the sea where men cannot follow, and, what with heroism being so unfashionable nowadays, nobody is going to believe the mere word of a hero like myself. But the thing about dragons, I am a person who knows about dragons, is that it could very well be that they are merely sleeping down there in the black, black depths. There could be numbers of them, all frozen in a sleep coma, with the unknowing fishes swimming in and out of their tentacles, and hiding in their talons and laying eggs in their ears. There may yet come a time when heroes are needed once more. There may yet come a time when the dragons will come back. When that time comes, men will need to know something about how to train them and how to fight them. And I hope that this book will be more helpful to the heroes of the future than a certain book of the same name was to me all those many years ago. It is easy to forget that there were such things as these monsters. I forget myself sometimes, but then I look up as I am looking up now, and I see my mind's eye, a shield strangely changed by a rich encrusting of jewel-like barnacles and cold water coral with an 8-foot tooth sticking right out in the middle of it. I reach out and the edge of that tooth is still so bitingly sharp after all these years that just a gentle brush with the fingers might send a rain of blood down on these pages. And I bend my head, not too close, and I am sure I can just hear very, very faintly, once I set the sea alight with every single fiery breath, once I was so mighty that I thought my name was death. Sing out loud until you're eaten, song of melancholy bliss, for the mighty and the middling all shall come to this. The supper is still singing. And then, and then instead of dragons are never grateful, it's crossed out never and then hardly ever. Which is Dragonese for the end. Well, alrighty. Well, that's How to Train Your Dragon. Then also, oh, and then here's a little, also before I officially wrap it up, here's a little letter from Stoic. So, the Isle of Berk, Dark Ages. All right, dear Professor Yabish, I am writing to complain most strongly about your book, How to Train Your Dragon. Have you ever tried yelling at one of these sea monster dragons yourself? Come to Berk, and I will show you what I mean. Yours not very truly, Stoic the Best. All right, well, that is it for How to Train Your Dragon. Wow. Really good, really great book. And I'm so glad Hiccup finally gets the reputation he deserves. He is finally being hailed as a hero and showing that he is useful. And so I'm glad he finally got his opportunity. He got an opportunity for that. And that's what I've said, because I know I also said it on the live stream that I know that my friend David, he wants to be a hero. He wants to be a hero in a way. And I just told him the best thing I can is to wait, gotta wait till an opportunity presents itself. We never know what, I'm sure God has opportunities in store. But yeah, I really like I'm glad how it all turned out, because honestly, I was a little startled when we thought that Toothless died. Because, that was, I actually felt that for a second. My heart actually sank. But then I was so happy and then I was actually really happy to find out that he actually lived. I'm glad nobody died as, I know it's a sacrifice, but still, it's like, I'm glad that everybody survived. I'm glad it all turned out well in the end. And I like those happy endings. Alrighty, well, that wraps it up for How to Train Your Dragon. Hope you guys really liked it, and then we'll stay tuned for next time. And I'm not sure what book I'll do next time, but I think I have an idea. But it's gonna be a shorter one. It'll only be for one Ryan's Day reading video, actually, because it's more of a kid's book. So, but yeah, stay tuned for next time. Thank you, Rappies, very much. Love you all to death. God bless, and I'll see you next time. All right. Thank you very much. Bye.